so much, Adrian and Theo, for that incredible conversation. What a way to kick off the day. My name is Rory Guinan from Endeavour Ireland. To date, we have 2 Endeavour entrepreneurs here in Ireland. Our first is Barry Napier of Cubic Telecom, and Barry is speaking on the IoT panel later today. Barry and Cubic exemplify what we are looking for here at Endeavour: the ability to source blue chip investors and customers, coupled with a top-class management team and a truly global ambition. Fresh from the international selection panel just last week, Samuel Denigan of Strong Roots was selected as our second entrepreneur. Strong Roots demonstrates that Endeavour is sector agnostic, with the business aiming to revolutionise the plant-based food space over the coming years. Just last week, Strong Roots announced a listing in over 2,000 Walmart stores, which shows great momentum for the business. Now on to our next session. I'm delighted to introduce our chairman at Endeavour Ireland, The Edge. Along with the rest of his bandmates at U2, Edge saw the fit between Endeavour's mission-driven offering and the gaps within the Irish entrepreneurial ecosystem. As he pointed out last year, the early years of being in a band are surprisingly similar to being a startup founder. So kudos to him and the rest of the band for keeping their founding team together for 40 plus years. Edge will be joined in conversation today by Roger McNamee. In his career to date, Roger was a founder at Silver Lake Partners and Elevation Partners. He is a best-selling author, a keen philanthropist, and recently featured in The Social Dilemma on Netflix. Roger has written extensively on the need to increase regulation over the technology sector from where we stand today. Along with Edge, he also shares a passion for music, being a fellow guitarist. Welcome, Edge. Welcome, Roger.
Thanks, Rory. And thank you, Roger, for agreeing to be part of the Scale Up Summit. I was just thinking that you and I, Roger, are actually almost mirror opposites, because I kind of dabble in investing and in business as a hobby, but I actually play electric guitar professionally. Your entire career has been, you've been like in the VC world at the top of that, but actually your passion is playing guitar. And you got a band called Moon Alice that are actually a really good band. You were telling me that you just got a new singer and you put out a new album?
We have we were about to put out a brand new album literally when the pandemic hit. And we were about to start a tour of the United States. We had 50 dates in theaters around the United States. And it was going to be a breakout year for us. But guess what? Events intervened.
I know. And well, let's go back to the beginning of when we first met, which was, you reminded me the other day, it was the morning after U2 had won 3 Grammys for Beautiful Day, and we met with Roger to talk about venture capital and new ideas that were emerging for the music industry because of the internet and because of disruptive things that were happening on the internet. And at that moment, you had this whole new vision for what music would be like. So what was so interesting about then, and how have things changed in your mind in terms of the vision we used to have of the internet and what it's become?
So I'm lucky that my investment career began before personal computers. So I've watched the tech industry from literally a seedling to where it is today with a front row seat. And in 2001 or so, when you and I got to know each other, the internet, we just burst the bubble and we were trying to figure out what would come next. We were at the beginning of what was known as Web 2.0, which was really about shifting from a web of pages to a web of people. We were still incredibly optimistic about what could happen. And it never occurred to me at that time that it would be possible to create global platforms that would control politics, would control public health, would control privacy, and frankly, would control the rate of innovation in the economy. And essentially, the success of the generation of companies founded right after you and I met was unprecedented. And in many ways, it paralleled the rest of the US economy, where economic power has been getting more and more concentrated for 40 years. And it's put us in this situation where if you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to scale a cliff. And you're trying to do it without any ropes, without any pitons. You're just doing it with your bare hands. And there's stuff falling down the cliff because the guys who control the cliff are not interested in having you innovate them out of business, right? Facebook has gone to great lengths to try to prevent TikTok from making deep inroads into its business. And so I am an advocate for entrepreneurs. And what I hope we will do in our half hour today is to engage in a thought experiment. Mm-hmm. I want everyone in this audience to understand that I am absolutely committed to entrepreneurship. And yet in my 40 years in the investment business, one thing that I've learned is that periodically big change takes place. You keep going in a direction for a long time, but then it gets disrupted. And I think we're at one of those moments. And it's not certain which path we will take, but I'm going to describe both of them, of what I think are the core alternatives, so that you can prepare. And my point to you is, I'm not saying you should believe what I'm saying. I'm asking you to engage in the thought experiment of imagining what would happen if I were right. And what would you wish you'd done today in response to those things if it turns out what I tell you is right?
That's really fascinating. There's an Irish poet called Brendan Kennelly, and he wrote a great book, the Book of Judas. But he has a fantastic quote, which always sticks with me. And he says, "If you want to serve the age, you must betray it."
Yeah.
In some ways, I think our problem right now in our culture is that no one is prepared to listen to a counter argument, because counter arguments have become threatening and they've become the basis for a sort of tribal mentality. So what I love about your attitude, Roger, is you're pro-business, you're pro-competition, you're pro-tech, you're pro-everything. You're just against monopolies. So and I'd love you to explain, there is an inevitability to some extent when you get a massive new industry, as we have seen, this third industrial revolution, that you are going to get monopolies building up within the industry. So the question is, how do we cope? How do we learn? How do we move forward? And why do we have to? What is so bad about a monopoly in an industry?
So when the United States was founded, the actual unifying economic notion of the time was the notion of Adam Smith and capitalism. And there was this very clear understanding of the US founding fathers that capitalism was inherently a pro-democracy idea. Lots and lots of little businesses with highly distributed economic power was going to be very stable. It was going to be incredible. Adam Smith said it would create more output, it would create more happiness and more benefits for everyone. And England at that time was a monarchy. It was authoritarian. And they used monopoly as the simplest way for the monarch to control the economy. So we in the United States associated monopoly with authoritarians and monarchy, and capitalism with democracy. And they are not the same thing. What we have today in the United States is not actually capitalism. We have monopoly. And the reason it matters is because the monopolist's economic opportunity is not made by satisfying the needs of customers or making the world happier or better. It's made from maximizing their own benefit. And the natural result of that is limitations on innovation and limitations on entrepreneurs and the opportunities available. So if you're starting a tech company today, your options are really narrow. There are three ways you can look at it. One is you can stay away from the big guys entirely, which is really hard to do because you have Amazon covering retail and cloud very carefully. You have Microsoft covering enterprise. You have Google and Facebook on consumers. And so it's finding clear space is hard, but that's clearly a strategy. The next one is to create something that you can sell to one of those guys. And that has been by far the most successful strategy for founders over the last, call it 8 or 10 years. And there is also then the TikTok strategy, which is get the lottery ticket and get the one thing that everybody wants at once, and you burst by them, and then you sell out to them later, okay? Which is what's going on now. And my point is, that's ridiculous. There is no way that serves the interests of consumers because every business model in that thing is essentially going to be married to the ones already in place. There's no effort today to sit there and look at this and say, well, what if people value privacy? Is there a business opportunity there? Is there a way for me to use artificial intelligence in a way that empowers people? Because the problem with business models in tech today is that most of them are predatory. You know, if you sit there and you think about whether Spotify is predatory towards musicians, if you think about Airbnb, or let's think about Uber and Lyft, it's predatory towards the drivers. If you think about Robinhood, it's predatory towards consumers who are trying to buy and sell securities. Facebook and Google are predatory towards everybody. They take their data and then use it to manipulate behavior. And all of these things, it's not necessary. There are all of these things you can do with technology that actually make people's lives better. And this is what Steve Jobs used to talk about. He talked about tech, computers, as a bicycle for the mind. The idea was it could be both fun and good for you. And there's no reason we can't do that today, except these monopolists don't want it. And so that stops us. And I look at this and I go, if I look at the next thing we should talk about is the economic trends, because we're at this moment where it's very unstable. The world benefited from 40 years of globalization. It reduced tensions around the world because everybody was trading. And you weren't going to have wars with people whose products you depended on, or you depended on to sell your products. We had, things in the United States attached to that globalization that were choices. We made it attractive for companies to fire all their employees. We made it attractive for people to move all their manufacturing overseas. But the result of that, of focusing only on shareholders, ignoring all the other constituencies, employees, the communities where they live, customers and suppliers, produced enormous wealth on Wall Street. But it's resulted in the United States where almost half our population is either unemployed or underemployed, where whole communities all across the country have lost their manufacturing base and lost their employment base, and therefore lost stability, where employer-tied healthcare in the United States creates this uncertainty and risk for people and essentially locks employees into jobs, whether they're the right job or not. Student loans tie them into a life of indentured servitude. I mean, all of these things serve the interests of the monopolists. But I think it's safe to say that other points of view are worth considering now. I mean, isn't there a way to use innovation to make more people more successful? And I would like to think the answer to that is yes. So I've spent the last 4 years trying to precipitate a debate on that. And, slowly but surely we're making progress.
So do you find that you're treated like Judas being treacherous and betraying the business world, or are people open? I mean, who is resistant other than obviously the big companies themselves? Or is your message getting through?
No. So Edge, I have a new set of friends. I mean, so if those of you have not read my book, I describe a story and, first, how I met Mark Zuckerberg when he was 22 years old, helped him keep Facebook independent, how I brought Sheryl Sandberg into Facebook. I was really close to that company. And so in 2016, before the US election, when I realized that Facebook was being used by bad people, the Russians and others, to undermine democracy and civil rights, I went to Mark and Sheryl as their former mentor, as their friend, to say, guys, there is something really wrong here. And it threatens the business. And I thought at that time they were the victim. Subsequent events showed that they were a much more willing and aggressive player in the situation than I had any inkling of. And shame on me. I'm an analyst. I probably should have seen it sooner, but I saw it before the election. I went to my friends. I spent 3 months begging with them to do the right thing. They did not. They refused. And that's when I realized I needed to become an activist. So since 2017, I've been out talking to the world. And it is absolutely true that Facebook doesn't have a kind thing to say about me. Google, most of the people don't have a kind thing to say. I still have a few relationships at Amazon and Microsoft, but most of the time they're mad at me too. But I have a lot of new friends. I have a lot of friends in Washington, D.C. in our government. And by the way, that's both Republicans and Democrats. I have a lot of people I've met in academia who do this for a living, whose work I try to amplify because it's so good. And But what I really have is I have the ability to live with myself.
Okay.
Because I believe there's a better day coming, and we get there the same way we got to the last one. We get there through entrepreneurship and innovation. But in order for that to happen, we have to force change. And let me say one more thing, Edge. People in tech don't realize the role that antitrust in particular has played in triggering the big cycles in tech. There would be no computer industry in the United States. There would be no Silicon Valley had it not been for a 1956 consent decree with AT&T that required that they abandon the computer industry, letting a separate one form, and that they take the transistor and put it in the public domain, which is what created Silicon Valley. And then the IBM case in the 60s created the software industry, and it led to the creation of the personal computer industry. The next AT&T case created data networking as an industry. The third AT&T case, the one that broke them up, accelerated cellular phones and created data communications, effectively creating the internet. And then the Microsoft case creates Google and then ultimately Facebook. And every entrepreneur should be 100% pro antitrust, because you're the beneficiaries of this. But you should also be in favor of a few other things. Like, I'm a big fan of safety as a requirement in tech. I don't think you should be able to ship a tech product without some accountability for harm that it causes. I just think you need to change the incentives so engineers think about how the product's going to work in the market before they do it, and recognize that if it doesn't work out, that's how it works in building trades. If you're an architect or a builder and your building falls down, you're personally responsible. And I think engineering should be like that. And I think that will create massive new opportunities because, not everybody thinks about that stuff equally well. And I can tell you for sure, there's nobody at Google and Facebook who thinks that way. So if suddenly you make safety an important issue, that becomes a competitive disadvantage to the monopolists. And then I think we need privacy laws too. And Europe's way ahead on that, but the US is catching up, particularly California.
So Roger, you talk about great opportunities coming down the road. Let's talk a little bit now about what could happen if things are changed, if the antitrust laws are brought in and things are opened up. Because right now, not only is it monopolistic in terms of the big companies, almost geographically it's true as well. I mean, Palo Alto has the lion's share of all the successful startups. Stanford, huge amount of success coming up there. But the regional universities, the regional zones, which is what Endeavor is all about, we want to make those geographical locations and those academic institutions be able to compete against Stanford and Palo Alto. So give a sense of what might happen.
Yeah, so I think everyone on this call knows that was demonstrably true 20 years ago, right? Silicon Valley really had not a monopoly, but it surely had disproportionate market share. Maybe 70% of the successful companies in the US came from Silicon Valley. I mean, Microsoft wasn't there and Amazon wasn't there, right? So you've had very conspicuous successes in other regions of the US. But what is absolutely true today is there is nothing special about Silicon Valley for starting either a tech company or any other kind of startup today. That every part of the United States, every part of Ireland, every part of Europe has the ability to do this. I mean, Ireland's particularly well suited because it was the home for all the big tech companies in Europe. And it is kind of the Silicon Valley of Europe. And Ireland should be, as you know, Edge, I went to people in the Irish Parliament and the Irish Data Authority and say, guys, you should be 100% pro antitrust. You want to break up Facebook, Google, all of these guys in Europe because that will be so great for European entrepreneurship. And the same thing's true in the US. If you live in Detroit, if you live in Miami, if you live in Louisville or any other city in the United States, your greatest barrier right now is the market dominance of these guys. You do not have trouble attracting interesting technology resources. There is capital. And God knows if we can change the economic structure, even just a little bit, it's going to open up whole classes of opportunity that didn't exist. I'll give you a couple examples. Artificial intelligence. Today, almost every use of artificial intelligence that is being applied is predatory in some way. There are almost no uses of artificial intelligence that are there to empower consumers. Well, I'm sorry, there must be a million different things you can do that empower consumers. I mean, that make them less vulnerable instead of more vulnerable. I look at things like facial recognition, and there, as far as I can tell, there is literally no good use of facial recognition in the marketplace today. I cannot believe that is like a law of physics. There should be something not harmful. Mm-hmm. But because all the stuff is affected by bias, and because the people most interested in it have bad intent, that has been the focus. And today there's a little burgeoning industry in privacy to protect people from these big companies. And I think that is just the smallest, tiniest baby step of where we're actually going to go. I would like to see, for example, right now the industry is highly centralized, but historically it's been a pendulum from decentralized to centralized and back. And each wave, personal computers were decentralized, the internet is centralized. And Google and Facebook have more or less prevented the pendulum from swinging. But Apple's really making a big effort. And if you think about it this way, what if everything that you have on the internet was distributed in such a way that none of the data was in the cloud? The app was in the cloud, but not the data. The data stays on your phone. What if your identity stays on your phone? How cool would that be? Right? I mean, the thing I'm describing is way bigger than what we have today. Because if you're empowering all the people instead of being predatory, the people are going to value that. And it'll be worth way more to them. I mean, they're worth $120 a year to Facebook. But, if you actually made their life better, they'd spend way more than $120 a year. I mean, they spend $100 a month on average on their cell phone bill. So that's really the target you're aiming at. And what's weird is Apple's an ally in this, not necessarily helpful to you, but what they're doing provides at least some shelter because they're very pro this kind of stuff. Where Google, especially with Android, is really, that whole approach is deeply flawed. But I think this is a moment in time when you can look at every function on the internet today and create an analog for it that is distributed instead of centralized. And some of those are going to be huge.
So give us some strategic advice for companies, based not in Silicon Valley, and how can they remain competitive and how can they be ahead of the curve if regulation starts to change and if obviously the big thing.
There's a step that's happening literally as we speak that I cannot predict that really matters for what you're supposed to do. If you're in the United States, and imagine, I'm just giving you this in terms of economics. This is not about politics, it's about economics. That the current president of the United States has a strategy of nationalism as opposed to globalism. Well, if you pay attention in Economics 101, you know that by definition, globalism will produce more output because the more diverse your employee base, the more diverse your supply base, the more diverse your customer base, the more output you're going to get. So going to nationalism, at least for a while, shrinks output. That had already started before COVID hit. COVID has crushed it, right? And so the US economy is running at least 10% below 2019 levels. And it's almost certain to fall very dramatically further if there is a second wave of COVID this winter. And so you're in this position where, oh my God, output is way down. This creates enormous challenges for any entrepreneur, right? Because you can't physically meet with customers. And there are all these barriers. You can't recruit people from outside the US. People from outside the US who used to be half of the technical people in grad schools can't come here to go to school. And if they can, they can't get a visa to stay afterwards. I mean, that is really complicated because one of the great advantages you had if you were in Louisville or Miami or Detroit or some other city in the United States was that your local university could attract students from all over the world. And that would really help your entrepreneurial stuff. And we're not doing that today. And we've still got COVID. And our response to COVID, shall we say, has not worked out. And COVID itself has exposed both the flaws of supply chains that were global in a world of nationalism, and the flaws of our politics, because we can't agree on the facts of COVID, so we can't solve it. And then on the problems of our healthcare system, which, is so concentrated, so monopolized that it can't respond, right? It can't make, cotton swabs. It can't make personal protective equipment. It can't expand testing capacity. I mean, it's nuts, right? I mean, the notion that it takes a week to get a test back is insane. I mean, I don't know what's going on. So all of those things represent huge opportunities for entrepreneurs to fix. Mm-hmm. But this is a really delicate moment because we don't know what the politics are going to look like next year. And we don't know whether we're going to take COVID seriously or not, right? And so that's I think this is a very tricky moment. So the message I give to every entrepreneur is right now, focus on survival. Gather as much capital as you can. Capital is freely available. Get as much as you can. Do not maximize your short-term growth if that maximizes your burn rate. Because we're going to know a lot more in 3 months than we know today. And those 3 months are not like a difference of 10% of what the outcomes are. It might be literally 180 degrees difference. And so that really matters. Shepherd your cash. Be really smart about what you're doing, because if I'm right about this big change, we're talking about a 40-year runway. You're going to spend the rest of your life enjoying what's going on, because while output will be a lot lower than it was at peak in 2019, it'll be going up perpetually, and your addressable market will grow because the guys who dominate everything will have smaller and smaller opportunity. And so even though the absolute market will be smaller, the addressable part for you will grow up. But in order to do that, you got to survive the next 6 months, right? And then depending on which way the election goes, you'll then have to survive the 6 months that come after that. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
So we're almost out of time, but do you think regulation is coming? Are you really convinced that?
Yeah. So in the United States, regulation is definitely coming, and it's coming in 3 different areas. So on antitrust, there is actually bipartisan support for antitrust. I work super closely with the antitrust division of the Justice Department, a little bit less closely with the Federal Trade Commission. Now, parts of the Trump administration, they're clearly moving down that path. They're about to file a big case against Google, and but that's not even the limit of it. In Congress, again, there's bipartisan support for antitrust. And at the state attorneys general, there is a nationwide state thing. So antitrust is going to happen. Google, Facebook, and Amazon at a minimum are going to get busted on it, and they will be beaten. So there will be change there. And don't assume they'll be broken up first. Assume that they'll be forced to no longer participate in markets that they operate. They won't be able to share their data sets in any competitive ways. There'll be a bunch of things that can happen. There will be some privacy regulation. That's likely to take place initially at the state level. But in California, there's a thing on the ballot in November that is transformational that will drive other states to act also. And it will change the rights you have all over the country. And then lastly, on safety, this notion, the one that's least far along but easiest to implement, are things that change the rules. What is known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, all the things that right now provide immunity to internet platforms. It's really important for entrepreneurs that those things go away, at least in part, because right now the network effects make these monopolies impregnable, and you have to break holes in them. So I think it's coming, but it'll be slow. It's not going to happen in time to save you next year, but it will change the trend, and it will make your ability to raise capital easier, because as these barriers go down, more and more business plans will suddenly look attractive. And that will be really positive, and more regions of the country will look attractive.
So Roger, in another few years at Endeavor, we'll be looking at the next crop of young entrepreneurs. Where do you see the opportunities, like for young student graduates who are just
sure
ideas?
So I live in California. My state is on fire. Climate change is an enormous business opportunity. The notion that shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy is bad for the economy is the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. I mean, the business opportunity of shifting renewable is enormous. And think of it as not just the power grid, but also transportation. And we're making lots and lots of moves in this area, but there are a ton that have not been done because, again, the energy companies have made it impossible. I believe we're going to have to rebuild our healthcare system from the ground up in the United States. And we're going to have to return to something, we're going to have something that covers everybody, but really, because you can't run an economy with the kind of healthcare uncertainty we have today. It just, the drag is too great. And employer-based healthcare is nuts. So we're going to have to make that change. And that's huge. There's the incremental opportunities. The United States spends so much money on the administration of healthcare that getting rid of that is going to be a big opportunity for entrepreneurs. And then lastly, I would say that in the tech space, empowering individuals. So it's giving people a chance to educate themselves, giving people a chance to enrich their lives in a really constructive way, to help them invest, as opposed to treating investing like a game that steals money from people. What if you actually tried to create investment products that help people be successful? I mean, what a novel idea. And so, Edge, I look at this and I go, I think the opportunities are huge, and they are not necessitated. They don't necessitate regulation, but regulation is transformational. So think of it, there's definitely an opportunity whether we get regulation or not, but it's probably 100 times as big if we do get the regulation. And the thing is, Endeavor is exactly the right model for how to do this, right? Which is, there are lessons from the past to be learned, but what's really important is the thing I'm describing is really different. We're going to need a new crop of entrepreneurs, people with much more diverse experiences. I mean, in the United States, we've never let women run companies. I mean, that's insane. Women are 51% of the population. They control 60% of the wealth and make 85% of the purchase decisions. I mean, backing women entrepreneurs is such an incredibly obvious idea. Backing Black and brown entrepreneurs, grossly underrepresented in our economy, huge, huge business opportunities. And, mentoring the way Endeavor does is a fantastic way to get at that kind of stuff, because this is unrealized economic opportunity. And I think we can grow our way out of the problems we have today. And, we need to make some political moves, but then the entrepreneurs just need to be smart. They just need to look at this and go, what are people not doing that I'm particularly good at?
Well, Roger, we've run out of time, but I just want to thank you so much. And I love the fact that you're so optimistic in spite of all the issues and some of them that you've brought to our attention. You remain really positive about the future, and that is great. And that's
absolutely
exactly we're about at Endeavor. So thanks.
Well,
so
and I'm like I said, I'm super excited by what you're doing here. I think this conference is such a good idea, and this organization, this is a noble experiment, and I expect great things to come of it.
Thanks so much. So great, and we could have talked for another hour at least. I'm going to check out your album. You have to send me a copy.
I will.
Okay, wonderful. So thanks, guys. I think we'll hand it back to the people in charge.
Thank you, Edge and Roger, for that great conversation. What a fascinating dialogue around the history of global innovation and how decentralizing industries can allow entrepreneurship to flourish in our communities. I hope you all enjoyed the dialogue as much as I did. My name is Deanna Callahan, and I'm the Managing Director of Endeavor Detroit, which was founded in 2015. Our affiliate works to create stronger, more diverse network of entrepreneurs, investors, and mentors across the Great Lakes region. We currently support 34 entrepreneurs who are leading 18 companies, some of which you might recognize, like Bonza, the creators of chickpea pasta, Bloomscape, which delivers easy-to-care-for plants directly to homes across the U.S., and Floyd, an e-commerce furniture company with a focus on sustainability. Other Endeavor Detroit companies you might not know yet have been going above and beyond to support our community over the last 6 months, including Akerval Technologies, a mouthguard manufacturer that pivoted their business to make face shields for frontline medical workers, or Work It Health, an online addiction treatment provider whose telemedicine services have been vital during the dual crises of the opioid epidemic and COVID. We couldn't be more proud to include these companies in our portfolio, and I hope you have the chance to learn more about them or even meet some of the founders through the networking feature on Hopin. Up next, we have our breakout sessions. These will take place in the sessions feature, which you can find by clicking the icon on the left-hand side of your screen. These are more intimate conversations about topics that have become hyper-relevant to growth stage companies over the last 6 months. We'll be back on the main stage around 3 p.m. In the meantime, please enjoy our breakout sessions and make sure to check out our brilliant board member and distinguished Harvard Business professor, Linda Applegate, in her session around the future of innovation. And also check out our Future of Diversity and Inclusion session featuring Endeavor Detroit friend and Cisco's Global Lead of Inclusion and Collaboration, Trey Boynton.